It's time now for Igniting Change, a weekly provocative and empowering program where you, the listener, can ignite change. Now here's your host, Barbara Onwine.
Get up, stand up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Igniting Change. Oh, my goodness, do we have a good show for you today, because we have an exclusive interview with one of the nation's foremost thinkers. Oh, I can't wait to get into this show, and I am so delighted that you have joined us today. Let me bring up my amazing, absolutely brilliant, strategic, for one of the real leaders when it comes to fighting for our voting rights. You know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the chairman of the board of the Transformative Justice Coalition, one of our most amazing lawyers in this country. That is none other than Darrell D. Jones. Hey, Darrell.
Hey, Barbara, it must be Tuesday, it must be noon Eastern time, because we're talking about igniting change. And Barbara, I could not be more excited than to have somebody who is an igniter for change across this nation, standing up for the democracy, standing up for the rights of the marginalized and the oppressed. My goodness, Barbara, it's going to be a phenomenal show that we have today. And let me tell you, Barbara, it could not be more timely, given what's happening from this administration, what's happening from this Congress, what's happening at some of these suppressive states across the nation when it comes to voting rights. This is going to be a timely conversation, Barbara.
No doubt about it. And as before we get into our amazing interview, I got to remind you that there are elections today, folks. If you are in Alaska, you heard me, if you're in Alaska, if you are in Florida, if you are in Wyoming, there are elections today. Primary elections. You've got to make sure that this is your general election date. If you haven't early voted, this is your time to vote. We need you to do that. If you got friends, family, colleagues, relatives, whatever, in good old Alaska, Florida, Wyoming, call them right now. Make sure that they have voted. If they haven't, urge them to do so immediately. This is our time. We only count if we vote. We only count if we're heard. We don't count if we sit on the sidelines talking about what we think. That doesn't matter. The only thing that matters in an election is who turns up and who votes. Darrell?
Absolutely, Barbara. That's the way that our voices are heard, and that's the way that democracy functions. It only works when we do our job and exercise our right to vote, Barbara. There are no excuses. Voting in most states is made almost as easy as possible, although we have all these barriers that are now being put up. But we're going to be talking about ways to overcome those barriers. But if you are in Florida, or if you are in one of the states that we just enumerated, please make your way to the ballot box. Alaska, Wyoming, make your way to the ballot box and get in that good trouble and have your voice heard.
That's right. The other thing is, on a more somber note, we do recognize that Wednesday, the 19th, will be the 19th birthday for Nolan Wells. Had he lived, he would have turned 19. There will be services held all over the country in his honor, major services in good old Mississippi. I know Dr. Jamal Bryant is speaking. I know that there's Ben Crump and the family. Yeah, we want to send our condolences to his mom, to his dad, on this very hard day. Having worked all these years with the Ahmaud Arbery family, we know there's no day more painful than the anniversary of the death and the birthday. So people, send your love and demand justice. We still don't have answers, and we need answers in the Nolan Wells case. I also want to send out a shout of support to the community of Madison, Wisconsin. We continue to watch what's going to happen with the murder or the killing of Corey Ruiz. Our eyes are on that. He was funeralized last week, and we will never let go of his demand for justice. So with that said, Daryl, it's time that you want to add anything on to that before we move into our major part of our show.
Barbara, the only part I want to add before we move in, because it all ties into voting, is that when we're talking about the prosecution or any of these cases, whether it's Corey Ruiz or if it's Nolan Wells, we're talking about elected prosecutors that are making the decisions. This is why we talk about the importance of down ballot voting. This is the reason that we talk about the importance of being registered and casting an informed vote. Folks, it's all interconnected. If we want to have justice, we've got to put forth and work in our democracy and elect people that will distribute justice for us. So that's all I wanted to add, Barbara.
Good point. Very good point. Thank you, Daryl. And once again, our condolences. And I intend to attend one of these services this week. Folks, get ready. Sit down wherever you are. Get your water. Get your pen. Get your pad. Get your iPad. Get your phone. Get your mobile device. Get ready because we're about to have one amazing show. Our show today is called Anti-Blackness and the 2026 midterm election. You heard me, Anti-Blackness and the 2026 midterm election, an exclusive interview with the amazing Dr. Carol Anderson. Folks, you have of Dr. Anderson because you've seen the public debate that her amazing scholarship has generated in this country. She is an American historian, an author, and an academic who serves as the Robert W. Woodruff Professor and former chair of African American Studies at Emory University. Her work focuses on public policy, race, justice, and equality in the United States. You know her because you've heard the debates around her book. One of her major books that she put out in 2026 rocked the world, and that book was called none other than White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide. It won a National Book Critics Civic Circle Award for criticism and became a New York Times bestseller. Come on now. People still citing white rage all the time. She also rocked this when she published an amazing book called One Person, No Vote, How Voter Suppression is Destroying Our Democracy. Woo! In 2018. It was long-listed for the National Book Award. She's also published the second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America in 2021 that talks about the Second Amendment and what it means for all people in this country and why race plays such a big role in this I got to protect my guns movement. She also wrote Eyes Off the Prize. Come on now. The United States and African American Struggle for Human Rights. And she looked at the years of 1944 to 1955, and it was the winner of multiple book awards. You know that Daryl and I have a keen eye on international human rights, and that is something that we demand all the time. She got her PhD in history from the Ohio State University in 1995. She has been elected to the American Philosophical Society in 2023. She is the recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the American Council of Learned Societies. She is amazing. We are so blessed to have with us today as our exclusive guest, none other than Dr. Carol Anderson. Hi, Dr. Anderson.
are you? Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about this conversation.
Oh, we know that this is a great one to have at this time in this historic moment because we are facing a crisis unlike any we've ever seen. In this respect, in this modern time, obviously we have seen some horrible things throughout history, and we'll talk about that. But right now in this moment, it's shocking what's going on, and we can't wait to talk with you about this. So why don't we get underway? Some people heard me mention that you are a professor of history and that you've written these amazing books. I know somebody is out there saying, why is history relevant to today's political dialogue? What's your answer to that, Professor?
So I'm going to quote Mark Twain. He apocryphally says, history may not repeat itself, but it sure do rhyme. And we are listening to the rhymes. These are the rhymes, right? And those rhymes are, how do we stop Black people from voting? How do we deny them their citizenship? How do we keep them away from the ballot box so that we can maintain exclusive right-wing white power, white supremacy as the operating code in our government, in our public policies? And this is what we're looking at now. This is exactly what we saw in 1890 with the Mississippi Plan. Mississippi looked up and they had more Black men registered to vote than they had white men. And Mississippi said, oh, it was like a Scooby-Doo moment. Oh, Shaggy. And so it was like, how do we stop this? How do we stop this? And what they did was they used the lie of election integrity, stopping all this massive, rampant voter fraud. What do we hear today? We have all of these lies about massive, rampant voter fraud, all of these lies about non-citizens voting, all of these lies, the lies that led to the insurrection on January 6th, about stolen elections in Atlanta, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, and Detroit. Those are cities that have sizable Black populations. And so once you know this pattern, you know what you're looking at. It's like a Rosetta Stone, understanding the way that anti-Blackness, seeing how it has worked historically. It's a Rosetta Stone to help us understand what we're looking at today. It also helps us understand how do we fight it.
Wow. And Daryl, please just break in when you want to ask a question. It's so important for us to talk about this because Mississippi, not only did they pass those horrific laws to make it hard for African Americans to vote, but there was a massacre, right? A major political massacre in Mississippi, as there was in New York, New Orleans, as there was in Wilmington, as there was in Camilla. It's not just been laws, it's been violence, racial violence and terror that has shaped the political climate. And so you mentioned January 6th. How, when you saw the whole insurrection on January 6th, and when you saw the newly elected President Trump pardon these people, what did that say to you about the future of the political climate in the U.S.?
It said to me, it's like watching Andrew Johnson after the Civil War give amnesty to the folks who fought against the United States of America, giving amnesty to all of those folks in the Confederacy. That's what that said to me. So it said to me that the way that we heal this nation, I'm putting heal in quotes, is basically on the backs of Black folk. That's how we heal this nation. We excise Black people from their citizenship. That's how we heal. And that's what we saw with Andrew Johnson, President Andrew Johnson, with the amnesty for the Confederacy, and this is what I'm seeing with Trump with the amnesty for the January 6th insurrectionists, because their goal was to overthrow that election, to overthrow the government, to overthrow the will of the people, and that is exactly what the Confederacy was doing as well. And so to basically give amnesty to that, to basically give it a pardon to that, you're saying that this is acceptable behavior. And when we don't deal with the kind of violence, the anti-Black violence that rains down on this democracy, it means that we will see it over and over again. That's why it is so essential that we have a really good analysis, a really good diagnosis of what was the tectonic plates underneath this thing, what was driving this thing. If we don't have that, then we keep doing these kind of like little reform things, shaving it off with a little Emory board, thinking, oh, we've done something. Look, we've got peace. We've got peace, but we don't have justice. And we've got peace that is based on the desecration of Black people. That is not peace.
And Professor, do you factor in, we're talking about the J6 and we're talking about the forgiveness, if you will, the pardons that the president then pushes through? How do we then factor in that a lot of those J6 people, a lot of those folks that are supportive of that type of movement also became part of being paid through ICE and also were part of what was being created with the fund, with the special fund that the president was trying to put in place for the victims of those crimes. How do we factor that into that analysis?
It is the same way. So, for instance, it is the way that the assault on the Black militia in Hamburg, South Carolina in 1870. I'm a historian. I'm bad with dates. That militia, the folks in that militia ended up as they slaughtered Black men who were under arms by law, slaughtered them. Basically, they had what they called a dead ring, where they were choosing them after they had tried to kill them with a cannon. Then they were choosing them and putting them in this circle, figuring out who was going to die. The leaders of that became leaders in the South Carolina government. And so when we see this happening, that again, there aren't consequences for those who do these kinds of mass killings, for those who systematically deny Black citizenship. Instead, they're rewarded for it. And so here in Georgia, after the 1906 Atlanta race massacre, which was based on a gubernatorial election, where the two candidates were vying for who could disenfranchise Black people the most. And it was almost like a name that tune thing. I can disfranchise them in nine moves. I can disfranchise them in 8. No, I can disfranchise them in 6. So this is how they're vying for it. And they had the media that was propping up Black rapist beasts are hurting white women. Black rapist beasts are going after white women. And so it was creating this kind of that aura of Black criminalization. And Black criminals should not be allowed access to the ballot box. So stop me when this sounds familiar. And so the man who won that election basically then moved right into this massive disfranchisement legislation that wiped out. So it moved Black voter registration from like 28% down to 4%. That is the power of what I call this bureaucratic violence. When we see what's happening now, it is the way that you want to provide compensation for these folks for trying to overthrow the government. Think about it as the way that they try to provide compensation to the Confederates it's the way that we pay folks for doing bad stuff to Black people. And This is what we saw happen. Yeah, this is what we saw with J6, right? Saying, okay, it is okay to say that all of the people who voted in Atlanta, that those weren't real citizens. And it was a congressman, I believe it was Mo Brooks, in Alabama, who said, if you only count the legitimate votes, Trump won.
Yep.
So that meant that right.
And that's a crazy, persistent mythology in America, which continues to utter Blacks as non-citizens, right? Is this view that somehow this is a white nation and that the Blacks and others are intruders upon that white nation, that somehow white people just mysteriously appeared on this continent, and somehow all the Native Americans just disappeared, right? Just all this mythology and untruth. So that brings us to anti-Blackness. People said they heard that in the title, and they're going, what in the world? Is there really such a thing? What, anti-Blackness? I know that people can act mean to Blacks. I know that people can be unjust to Blacks, but what in the world is anti-Blackness?
And anti-Blackness is that concept that Black people aren't human, that black people are monsters, black people are creatures, black people are beasts. And think about how many times we've seen that kind of language of monsters and beasts. It's when we see that language when they're talking about when the cops kill a black person. I was afraid. He was a monster. I was afraid. I just saw this beast coming at me. I was afraid. That is anti-blackness. So when black people aren't human, you can do to them whatever you want to do. And that becomes so foundational. When you read through the slave codes back in the 17th century, you see it coming through, that sense that this is a creature to be feared. This is a creature that is a threat to the safety of the white community. And we have to do everything in our power to protect the white community from these beasts. And so we see it. So this is one of the things that I was tracking in my work on the Second Amendment. It's like how you keep seeing it over and over. One of the guys said it was after one of the uprisings. If we have to keep a monster, we must keep that monster in chains. And that is anti-blackness. It is the way that black people aren't human, because since they aren't human, they can't be real citizens. And since they can't be real citizens, they can't have rights. And since they can't have rights, they can't be allowed to vote. And so part of this major history of an American society is black people asserting their humanity, asserting their dignity, asserting their citizenship, asserting their rights. And that has been the clash back and forth.
Whew. And oh my goodness, that is so powerful. And I know somebody's out there saying, but that was back in the 1700s. That was back in the 1800s. What does that have to do with today? You know what? So tell people, how does anti-blackness manifest itself in today's world, in today's United States of America? How does anti-blackness continue to manifest itself, that idea of dehumanization?
Think about it. It's when Trump and J.D. Vance during the election campaign talked about Haitians eating cats and dogs. They're eating your pets. Who does that? Who eats the pets? Who eats cats and dogs? Those aren't human beings. Notice he didn't say, look at our Norwegian immigrants. They're eating the cats and dogs. That never came out of his mouth. When he talked about the Somalis, he called them garbage people. They're garbage. We don't want that garbage. He didn't even call them people. We don't want that garbage in our nation, in our country. So when folks are garbage, when folks are eating the cats and dogs, that is how it manifests itself. Because when you think about it, when that is their framework for understanding, when they look at black folk, that's what they see, garbage. When they look at black folks, what do they see? The kind of beasts that eat cats and dogs. And so what that emanates, that comes through in the policies. And so when you're looking at, for instance, Trump's push for the SAVE Act, saying all you got to do is just prove you're a U.S. citizen, and knowing good and doggone well that proof does not come through in your driver's license, because only 5 states have your citizenship on the driver's license. That comes through like in a passport. Only 34 to 38% of African Americans have a passport. So it is a way to wipe out almost 70% of black voters on something that sounds innocuous. Like all you got to do is just prove your U.S. citizenship. Because who has the right to vote? Only human beings, and only white people is what they're really saying. That's how it manifests.
It's really interesting because when you start looking at what I call the dehumanization, right? The dehumanization of black people, and we try to give concrete examples of it. Sometimes I think the best way to give the example is to have a non-black person doing an act that they've accused a black person previously of doing and showing what the reaction is. And what I mean by that is Luigi Manzoni in New York. Wouldn't that be an example? If Luigi Manzoni was black, I just can't imagine that we'd have all these people that are gathered. And I'm not condoning what he did or anything along those lines. When it comes to the dehumanization of the black person, I just couldn't imagine being treated the same way. Am I off on this?
No, you're not. And so let me give you another example. And it's another example where I'm going to tie historical evidence to current evidence. So historically, So when you had these white abolitionists, like a man like Elijah Lovejoy, he had an abolitionist newspaper in like St. Louis, and they kept destroying his press because they didn't want to hear that mess that black people should not be enslaved because black people were people. And so he finally got his gun to protect his press, and he was killed before he could use his gun, and nobody was found guilty. Now let's look at Kyle Rittenhouse. When Kyle Rittenhouse carries a gun to go into a Black Lives Matter protest, he crosses state lines with an illegally obtained a weapon that he should not have. And the cops just greet him. We're so glad you're here. And then he kills two men and he wounds another. And he puts his hands up, and the cops don't arrest him because they're not afraid of him. But then think about Mir Rice, the 12-year-old boy in Cleveland who's playing in the park with a toy gun. And Ohio is an open carry state. The cops rolled up on him, and within 2 seconds, they gunned him down because they were afraid. So cops aren't afraid of Kyle Rittenhouse, who has shot and killed two men and wounded a third, but they're afraid of a 12-year-old boy playing with a toy gun in a park in an open carry state. Stop. So this is what I mean by, and so, and another way to look at this, so I'm talking about Elijah Lovejoy, think about Alex Preddy, the white man at the ICE protest who was basically trying to protect his neighbors from getting slaughtered by ICE, and they killed him. And one of the things that you immediately heard them talk about was, he had a gun. These are the Second Amendment folks that didn't mind Kyle Rittenhouse going into a Black Lives Matter protest and gunning down folks who were there because Black Lives Matter. But when you're saying that Black Lives Matter and you do have a gun and you're there to protect your immigrant neighbors, then it's okay that you get gunned down. And so you've got two white men, but the circumstances are different. One is about basically destroying Black lives, and the other one is about protecting Black lives. And so that protection of Black lives means that you don't have any protections. Your white skin is not enough for protection. This is why you see that language about how anti-Blackness works. Anti-Blackness works that anti-Blackness becomes that kind of constant through line on it, and who is protecting and who is defending and how they are defending and how they are protecting and what they are going against and what they are protecting becomes what makes it situational. So yes, you can just embrace Kyle Rittenhouse, but it's okay to kill Alex Preddy.
And it's okay to pardon 1,500 violent insurrectionists and not talk about the fact of how many hundreds of them have been rearrested, people. Everybody listening. Hundreds of them have been rearrested just because they're criminals. But nobody can talk about them.
And so for things like rape, things like sexual assault, for really violent acts, because these are violent people.
Yes.
But it becomes okay because of what they were fighting for, which was basically to destroy the reality of Black voters, the result of Black voters. So that makes what they did okay. And that's part of what we have to reckon with. That is the power of anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness will systematically destroy American democracy.
Woo! Woo! People rather not have it than share it, right? They rather not have a democracy than share it with Black folks.
And this is also one of the...
No, please, go ahead, Doc.
So one of the other things, so just building off of what Barbara said, one of the things that becomes a key trigger is like remember when I talked about how Mississippi had more Black men registered to vote than white men, and so they're like, we got to stop this. Whenever you see the rise of Black political power, you're seeing this massive backlash, both not only in violence, the physical violence, but also in the what I call the bureaucratic violence, which are the laws and the Supreme Court decisions that systematically undermine and gut Black political power. When Black folks look, so after with Obama in his second term, you had a higher black voter turnout rate in some states than you had white voter turnout. Those states immediately after the Supreme Court Shelby County v. Holder decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act, they immediately implemented voter suppression laws in order to curtail and to cut down black political power.
And your book, Right Rage, actually takes that on. And folks, you need to take time. This is your summer, right? People are coming to the end of your summer and you're getting those last reads in. Get these books. Get White Rage. Get One Person, No Vote. Get these books and read them, because the analysis that Dr. Anderson is giving you will carry you through the rest of this year and into the future. But talking White Rage, you did not do one of these books that's here's how blacks have progressed. You did a book about how whites have reacted and had white backlash to African American progress. Can you tell us, because you just mentioned Obama and you just said what happened, let's talk about that some more, about that white rage, that's why MAGA was able to be so strong in our society, but also we're strong in our pro-democracy views. But tell people, what just some of those manifestations that we see white rage right now, and I would say even the Supreme Court got some of it.
Woo! The Supreme Court is notorious for white rage, I must say. So coming out of the Civil War with Reconstruction, that Supreme Court systematically dismantled the pillars that the radical Republicans had put in place to recognize black citizenship. So they went after the 13th Amendment with the badges of servitude, basically saying segregation, just because we have like Jim Crow, that doesn't mean that there's a badge of servitude there. Yes, it does. Going after the 14th Amendment with due process and equal protection under the law, and going after the 15th Amendment with the right to vote. And also going after the Force Acts, which basically was dealing with white domestic terrorism. So you saw the Supreme Court gut all of those efforts, and that led us into the hellscape of Jim Crow that took the power of a massive civil rights movement to overturn 100 years later, almost 100 years later. And so what we're seeing today, and I really do believe this, and so remember in the 2020 election, when we're dealing with a pandemic and Trump is running again for re-election, and you had this massive black voter turnout, and folks were figuring out, how am I going to vote in the middle of a pandemic? Because I believe in democracy, and I'm going to fight for this democracy with the weapon that I have, which is my vote. And so black folks did that, and that's what flipped Georgia. That is what made the difference in these other states. And so the response from these other states not only was the lie about they stole the election, they stole the election. And so think about how Rudy Giuliani was talking about the two black women, the poll workers in Fulton County. He basically said, look, I was a prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, and I know criminals when I see them. They were passing around the ballots like they were heroin and cocaine. So black women have got to be drug dealers. So that kind of criminalization of blackness is also fundamental to anti-blackness. And it's also fundamental to the systematic denial of rights. And so we saw that after the 2020 election when the Georgia got flipped. And so you saw on January 6th, there was the insurrection. On January 7th, the day after, Georgia began its election integrity hearings in order to craft legislation to make people feel comfortable and confident in the elections. Now, there were 3 audits that were done in Georgia. 3 audits, and one was a hand count. And those 3 audits showed nothing. Those 3 audits said that the numbers were what the numbers are. And so this is why you have Trump calling in saying, look, all you got to do is just find me 11,000 votes.
Which is right, that's the criminality. Daryl?
Yeah, and Dr. Anderson, there's some folks that are listening to the analysis and they're thinking, particularly right now, I'm thinking about the state of Florida, right? And Byron Donalds. How do we explain to our voters
Bless his heart.
and Donald. And what if he wins? Does that go to support against the Calais decision? How do we factor that in?
So with Byron Donalds, where they like tokens get spent. And so this is the man who basically said black families were stronger under Jim Crow.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
That's him. That's him. And I'm like, so when the 14-year-old who sent a white girl a Christmas card in Live Oaks, Florida, was basically bound up and thrown into a river, and his father had to watch him drown and die. That was stronger, so a black father can't protect his son. That was stronger under Jim Crow. What? And so there are all of these horrific stories about black families being systematically destroyed by Jim Crow. And how this black man can fix his mouth to say black families were stronger under Jim Crow tells you that he's a token. And one of the things with these tokens is that they represent what becomes acceptable for basically white supremacists. So you need to have that black voice that covers your racism, that says, this is a black man who said it, so I can't be racist. That is the role that Byron Donalds plays. He provides the cover for white supremacy, and he's willing to do that because he thinks he's going to get a taste of power. He thinks he's going to get a taste of resources. But tokens get spent.
Woohoo! My, the tokens. My. Oh, my goodness. When you look around, and one of the things you mentioned recently, because you and I have the joy of working on many things together, and we're bound by that wonderful Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw in her work with the African American Policy Forum. One of the things that you've been mentioning is this new rise. If traditional, just societal racism, white supremacy wasn't enough, there's a new rise in eugenics, a new eugenics movement that's coming out of the Silicon Valley and has infiltrated this Trump administration. Can you talk more about that?
And again, it's what we're seeing is we've also been dealing with the role of racial fascism in the United States. And what that really deals with is this kind of sense that there is only the perfect human being, and that perfect human being, by this definition, is white. And so that means that you don't have the disabled. That means that you don't have folks who aren't white. And so you see this movement across. So when you think about it, the level of policies that where you have high black maternal mortality rate, and you're seeing the clamp down on funding of Medicaid that will help provide for funding for these hospitals. And so these hospitals are closing. And so black women are having to go even further and further in order to get basically OBGYN care. That's fine. That's fine because that high maternal mortality rate just works in the eugenicist framework. That's the way it's supposed to be. Whereas you're also seeing this massive push in terms of the language and the policies that they're putting out, that white women need to get out of the workforce and they need to basically submit to their husbands and have more and more babies. And so, again, think about the great replacement theory that is driving this thing. And that was the great replacement theory that led to that guy going up to the grocery store in Buffalo and gunning down those black people, because it was designed to make sure that these black people aren't here on this earth, because we need to have white people who are the vast majority, that they hold the majority of the population, they hold the majority of the power. And so that whole sphere about weakening us in terms of our health care, weakening us in terms of our food supplies, weakening us, while also pushing forth this kind of vision of the perfect white person. And you hear that from Elon Musk, yuck. You hear that from him. You hear that from a Peter Thiel. And it's not surprising that you're hearing this from folks who came out of apartheid South Africa.
And some people would say, wait a minute, J.D. Vance is married to an Indian woman. And so that can't be correct, right? Because he married an Indian woman and Mitch McConnell married an Asian woman. How does that reconcile with white supremacy?
And Thomas Jefferson fathered 6 children with Sally Hemings.
Yes.
And also think about the ways that when Trump said something, I forget what it was, but something really racist about the Chinese, Elaine Chao, Mitch McConnell's wife, was right there.
She sure was.
And Mitch didn't say anything. When J.D. Vance was getting basically pummeled by the MAGA folks because he had this brown wife, he didn't stand up and defend her. What he basically said was, "I wish she would become Christian."
And that's part of that old kind of honorary white. As long as you're serving us, you can be quote honorary white as long as you're serving us. And that's what we're seeing with the Childs and the Usher Vances and other people. That is so amazing. Daryl, I know you got a question. I'm sorry. I just can't help myself.
Oh. No, that's fine. That's fine, Barbara. Enjoying the conversation. Dr. Anderson, one of the things that we've talked about the Supreme Court today and its assault on voting rights, and of course we're all familiar with the Congress's no hands and the executive orders coming from the executive branch. What are some of the things that you think that we can do now to confront the crisis that we're in?
It is to mobilize. It is to really learn what's going on and not to get seduced by the sound bites, not get seduced by the language of election integrity, not get seduced by the language of all of these non-citizens voting, not get seduced by the language of voter fraud. Because when you really look at what's going on, so let me back up. I think about several years ago, there was an interim Secretary of State. His name was David Whitley, and he was down in Texas. And he held this big press conference saying, and it was almost like Joseph McCarthy, "In my hands, I have a list of 95,000 non-citizens who are on our voting rolls, and 58,000 of them have voted." And it was like, oh my gosh, fear. And so Trump calls in going, "See, this is why we have to have voter ID." And then when he said that he turned 58,000 of those names over to the Attorney General, it turns out, and that he wanted immediate purges that the county boards of elections would immediately purge these folks. When the county boards of elections started going through those lists, they found out that so many of those people were naturalized citizens. They were actually U.S. citizens. They weren't these non-citizens, and that Whitley was using an old database, a database that does not update with naturalizations. But it is, again, that fear. It was that big press conference, and so you hear the big press conference, and you don't get to hear what actually happened. And so this is what happens with the language of voter fraud. And it was the way that fear is used to drive these kinds of policies that massively constrict democracy, massively constrict the citizenship of American citizens. And so it requires us organizing. It requires us knowing. It requires us weighing in on our congressional representatives, our state legislators, and in our communities, that we're talking with each other, that we're going to these protests, that we are writing the postcards, that we are doing everything, that we have a plan for voting. So when we know that Trump is salivating at the possibility of calling a national emergency and sending ICE and sending troops to the polls, that we have a plan, that we're already thinking through, that we're already working with our AGs, our state AGs. Do they have the right to do this? No, they don't. And what can we do? What do you have in place in order to circumvent this, in order to stop this? It requires us also having a plan for voting. So voting early, or if you're going to do absentee ballots, getting that done, knowing when you can apply for an absentee ballot, knowing when it has to be in, and what kinds of documentation you need with that. And so having that plan for voting. So I've got to say, I have been heartened, just absolutely heartened by the incredible voter turnout that has happened in this primary. Yes. Because to me, this is also speaking to the fact that when folks know that democracy is in trouble, they will stand up and fight for it. And that's what we're seeing. When we're seeing something like a triple turnout rate in South Carolina, 600,000 more voters in Michigan. Yes. Just when we're seeing this over and over, it really shows that people are willing to fight for democracy with the tools that they have at hand. And it requires us organizing, mobilizing, laying in on our representatives to help them understand that, no, this is not acceptable. So think about how South Carolina, after the Calais decision, how they were getting ready to redraw the districts to get rid of the lone black district in South Carolina. And then that one Republican stands up and he's like, folks are mad. We do this, we're going to see it. We're going to see a turnout rate, and we're going to get something that we're just not ready for. And so I advise us not to do this. And think about Georgia. Georgia organizations got together, and they flooded the State House on that first day of the special session. And the Georgia Republicans looked up and said, never mind, because they knew with that kind of rage coursing through the body politic, that they were going to lose their jobs. They were going to lose their jobs. And that's what we have to make really clear. It is organizing, it is mobilizing, it is being informed. It is not being seduced by the language of election integrity. It is not being seduced by the language or by the fear that comes through saying they're trying to take our elections. They're trying to take our democracy away from us. And that's what it's going to require.
And let's talk some more about that, because our listeners are activists. They're really good, and they go out and they make change all the time. And one of the things you and I know, Daryl, we all know, is that people are going to encounter folks who will say, why should I vote? It doesn't matter. The parties are the same. There's no difference. My life won't change. I think we need to let's talk about how we make sure people understand what's really happening and translate it. I thought the poll that was done by the Black Women's Roundtable that showed some 88% of Black women said that they have been negatively affected in their economic standing in the last, since Trump came to office. And it's not just the hundreds of thousands who have lost their jobs, but they talked about Social Security cuts. They talked about meal cuts, SNAP cuts, child care cuts, all of these things and the rise, as you mentioned, in maternal deaths, all of these things that it wasn't just they were fearful of. They literally, 48% of everybody, almost half, said they had themselves been directly affected by these policies. So when you think about that, it seems to me that as we're looking at this year, Dr. Anderson, that is that kind of knowledge and acknowledgement that people need to understand. Daryl, isn't that like what we saw in New Jersey when we were there in the last year before their state election, gubernatorial election, where people were saying, this is going to hurt me. That's why I'm voting. I'm just thinking, Dr. Anderson, about how we do that kind of translation to our people so that people understand that elections do impact them.
And so I think one of the things is, I think about the 2017 special election in Alabama for U.S. Senator, where you had Judge Roy Moore, the man who could not get into a mall because he had been banned because of the fear of young girls from this man coming in there, harassing them, and Doug Jones, who was the prosecutor for the killer of the 4 little girls in the bombings at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. And the polls had shown that this was Judge Roy Moore's, because Alabama's a red state. This is Judge Roy Moore. But organizations came into Alabama, and one of the groups was Black Voters Matter. And Black Voters Matter went in there, and they didn't just look at folks and say, hey, you got to vote. They asked people what they wanted. What did they want for their lives? And they started talking. I want my baby to have a good school. I want to be able to get sick and not go broke. Or I want to be able to go to the doctor and stay well and not go broke. Or I want to get rid of the fecal lake behind my house because I really want a real sewage system. And so it's linking what people need in their lives with public policy. And that public policy is driven by the elections. It's driven by who's in power, because who's in power, those are the policies that they craft, or those are the folks that they appoint to implement their policies. And it's by making that kind of connection. What do you want? And so listening to people talking about, I want to be able to afford a house. What does that affordable housing policy look like? Who's advocating for that? Who's doing that work? Who has a policy framework to make that happen? Because understanding, to be able to connect those dots helps people understand that, no, the two are not just the same. So I gave a talk in October of 2016. Lord, I'll never forget this. Remember the date, October 2016, and I was up at the Schomburg in New York City. And I gave a talk on voting rights and voter suppression. And young brother stood up in the back and he said, yo, I hear you, sister, but Hillary and Trump are just the same.
Oh.
And I went all Amy Winehouse. No, Hillary is a politician. You can get to her. Trump is a demagogue. You can't get to him. And I said, but even more, think about, we have 4 or 5 Supreme Court justices who are knocking on 70's door. And that means that he's going to be able to appoint, if he gets in, he's going to be able to appoint somewhere between 3 to 5 new Supreme Court justices. And they will be in power, and their decisions will basically be on top of us for at least 100 years.
Wow.
When you begin to think about what that means, that's what we're dealing with right now. So you think about the Calais decision. You think about the decision that basically says that government agencies don't have the kind of expertise, the Chevron decision. So you're thinking you're allowing basically folks to pollute the soil, the water, and the air, and
wow.
the food supply. Yeah. And so when you begin to think about what does it mean, who's in power has to deal with who's voting. And let me just give another historical analogy. Back in 1942, only 3% of age-eligible African Americans were registered to vote in the South because of the massive disfranchisement that had happened. 3%. And in that 1942 election, the voter turnout rate was just 7%. So 7% for an election that deals with who congressional representatives will be, who's in the Senate, who has that kind of power in order to shape those policies. When you begin to think about the areas in this nation that have the highest infant and maternal mortality rates, the areas in this nation that have the lowest income, the lowest educational attainment, all of those components, those are those areas where the politicians only had to be responsive to just 7% of the electorate.
And that's what they're trying to do again. Yeah. Yes. Go ahead, Daryl, because we're, believe it or not, we're at the end of our show. Go ahead, Daryl.
At the very end of the show, Dr. Anderson, folks are listening to this information. They're going, my goodness, this woman is just incredible. Where do people contact you? How do they get more information about you, Dr. Anderson?
So the best way is I've got a website, .org. Yeah, and that has a lot of my writings on there, and it has the op-eds that I've written, and it also has my contact information through my assistant.
And it's Professor, it's spelled all the way out?
All the way out, yes.
ProfessorCarolAnderson.org.
Anderson.org, folks. Y'all go to ProfessorCarolAnderson.org to get more information. Dr. Anderson, we're so appreciative that you were with us today. The line that will be my takeaway line is going to be tokens get spent. Don't be a token. Folks,
Carol, you're in trouble. You started something. And please come back. We're going to definitely ask you to come back on our show. Go ahead, there.
Absolutely, folks. We tell you every Tuesday, get off the sidewalks, get into the street. If you're in Florida, if you're in one of the voting states, make your way to the ballot box today. Remember, next Tuesday, noon, Eastern Standard Time. Stay strong. Stay in the fight. We'll see you all and talk to you next Tuesday at noon. Peace, everybody.
Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're awesome. Love you.
The views and opinions expressed in this program
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Barbara.